Yo, waiting for a great time to do this first reading from my father's memoirs. And I've been, waiting for the perfect place or, go to the town that he um, uh, was camped, where his, use your words, AJ, use your words. His Campanare was where they were stationed in Pleiku, Vietnam. And I've been waiting to get there, but that's hard. I'm volunteering and I have a schedule and I teach classes. Blah, 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 blah. By the way, this is my new favorite addiction. It's called Cafe Shuada. I don't think I said that perfectly right. Usually I do a better job. But at any rate, so I've been waiting to read from my father's memoirs until the perfect time. And I'm stationed. I'm not in the military. I am living in a small town in central Vietnam called Khao Zat, and I'm volunteer teaching there. And yesterday I came home from a day of playing on the beach where I was going to do talk, do one of these readings. And there was this group of French guys there, and we decided to go back to the beach, and we spent the night in the hotel, and it was super crazy because Vietnam is interesting. Like, the male female thing is it's sexist in ways that we don't understand, and it's not sexist in ways that we don't understand. It is so crazy how differently you can view sexism. Anyway, I was with all these, so I'm 43, and all these guys are 20s, and there's five of them, and then Brian is another volunteer, and he's 25, and then me. So that makes seven of us. So we had to rent two rooms, two people to a bed, and the local, and it was late at night when we showed up at this hotel, and the guy's like, "Well, you can't all sleep, you know." And he goes, "Mama," and he points at me, "has to sleep in a room by herself. Not in Vietnam. You can't put all these guys in a room with this woman." That was really interesting. I mean, we did what we wanted because that's. What are we going to do? Rent 3 rooms so I can have my own room? No. And I'm not sleeping with a bunch of 20-year-olds, French dudes, in a room with 3, 4 people in there. Weirdo. But, that's their tradition. So we, as typical Americans and foreigners, we just tromped all over that and did exactly what we wanted to do anyway. But at any rate, so Cafe Jourda. So I've been waiting for this perfect time to do this reading. And the thing is the first reading is actually the letter that I wrote in 2011. 2011. My mom called me one night and was like really upset. And I was like, "What the fuck is going on?" She's like, "Your dad is trying to, apparently he's, suffering from PTSD and he doesn't sleep well and da da da, and it's the reason he makes decisions the way he does, and why it's always like risk it all and lose everything or succeed all the way." And I'm like, what is going on? I've heard of PTSD at that point, but I didn't really understand what it was, right? As most of us don't really understand what it was. But anyway, she was like, "Your father's going to the VA for psychiatric evaluation to decide whether he's crazy enough to qualify for 100% disability." And I was like, "Well, I think I can help with that." And my mom was like, what the fuck do you mean you can help with that?" I was like, "Well, so when I was 18 years old and we went up to Vermont to this big party where all of my dad's military buddies were all gathering. It was this huge hippie fest up in Vermont on this farm. Louie and Annie have this beautiful spot, and we're all hanging out there, and one of my dad's military buddies pulls me aside. So what I'm doing is I mix the sugared milk in with the very, very, very strong coffee, and then I pour it into a glass with a bunch of ice in it, and it becomes the most delicious version of coffee I've ever had. And now I'm addicted. This is my second one today. I've been hanging out on this beach. Yeah, poor me. So anyway, so I was like, remember that party where, all of Papa's military buddies were there? Well, one of them pulled me aside and was like, can I talk to you? And we went for a walk in the woods. And anyway, I told her the story that I'm about to read you. And I was like, so I think this will help make the VA decide that Papa is crazy enough to be considered 100% disabled. Needs a little bit more ice. A little too strong. But I'm in the middle of the video. So anyway, essentially, well, I'll just read it. I'll just read it to you. So I wrote this in 2011. It is the first, it's the first thing my dad put in. I was very surprised, actually, when I first read my dad's memoirs, Rosie and Me. Rosie is the guy he flew with. My father was the pilot, and Rosie was the gunner. Technically the observer. They called them Scout and Observer. I think it's so cute, because I grew up thinking my father was like a Boy Scout in the Army. He was like, yeah, I was a scout. And I was like, oh, does that mean you like fly over, take a look at things, and then you fly back home and you tell everybody what's going on out there, and then when they're done, then you stay back behind the lines and somebody else goes and destroys the enemy? Nope. Scouts were the front line. They were there to completely, they were called the hunt and kill. They called themselves the hunt and kill platoon. But at any rate, this letter, the letter that I wrote to the VA to help my father's decision, or help them decide whether or not my father qualified to be 100% PTSD. And just so you see, so this is a picture of my dad and Rosie in their chopper in OH-6, I believe. I'm going to say things wrong. I'm not in the military, and he didn't talk to me about it very much. So he was A Troop Scouts, 7th Squadron, 717th Air Cav, Central Highlands, South Vietnam, 1968. Xin chào. Got observers. I always have observers. So, I called it the day I was told my father was insane. When I was around 19 years old, the family took a trip up to Veggie Fest in Vermont. It was being hosted by Louis Pulver, one of my dad's best friends from the military. But Louis Pulver and he met in Germany, not in Vietnam. There were a few other pilots from my dad's unit, and I was meeting them for the first time. At any rate, great party. Had a blast. A lot of singing, a lot of craziness. No weed. What the fuck? So, at any rate, great party. Composting toilets dug into the ground, communal soup pots, nightly bonfires, dancing and singing by the light of the moon, kids running wild, talent shows in the back of an empty cargo trailer, organic food. They grew all their own food. They all belonged to a CSA. Such hippies, such lovely, lovely, lovely people. I like hippies. Great conversation and knee slapping. Not a lot of stories about Nam, though, even though they were all military buddies. We had tents, pop-up campers, RVs, the works. I'm setting the scene for this bizarre conversation that is about to happen. At one point, one of Papa's Army buddies quietly asks if I wouldn't mind taking a moment to walk with him. Sure, what's up? So he starts walking to the outskirts of the main camp along the tree line, obviously not wanting to chat it up within earshot of anyone. So I wait for him to share his thoughts, because that's how he looks. He's all pensive and he's like looking all nervous, thoughtful and slightly concerned. Not a big guy, thin, non-intimidating, but kind of on the serious side, at least at that moment. He picks the conversation up with, so, Um, what was it like to have Wayne as a father? Blink, blink, blink. I'm like, what? I was a bit surprised by the question. I said, excuse me? What is it like having Wayne Miller as a father? Well, pretty good. Why? What do you mean by that? I was feeling a bit protective and wasn't ready to go into detail about my relationship with my father, good or bad, with this stranger. Well, he said, hesitating, your father's insane. What? So I'm 18 at the time, right? I'm like, what are you talking about? My father's insane. And oh, yeah, that's the next line. I'm sorry. What? He goes, your father is insane. He is crazy. He said it slowly and with very specific emphasis and certainty, as fact, not opinion. What are you talking about? He's crazy, but like cool crazy. I wasn't buying it. Let me put it to you this way. Your dad is not normal. We had a cartoonist, a doodler in our unit. He'd draw all of us in different caricatures. He'd draw your father flying a chopper, head hanging out of the side, eyes wild with blood and intestines hanging from his teeth. That is who he was. I don't remember exactly what I said back to him. Something along the lines of admitting that it hadn't always been roses, and that there was strong evidence that being a husband and dad didn't really work. No, thank you. And there was strong evidence that being a husband and being a father wasn't, easy for this guy. Didn't really work for him until I was about 11 or 12. He jumped into my life for the very first time around 11 or 12 years old, and I remember being like, who the fuck do you think you are? Gonna start slapping down with the rules and with the fatherly wisdom after 11 years? I came around. At any rate, I left it at that. He didn't really say much more than that. We walked back to the camp and we didn't talk about it again. I didn't ever tell my parents about the conversation until telling Mom about it 2 nights before I wrote this. Something she said about Pubba made me think of it. That was when she said that the VA weren't necessarily sure whether he was crazy enough to be put on 100% disability. That conversation with that Army buddy has always stayed with me. What's interesting is that conversation stayed with me. It was actually rather defining for me, except for the fact that I didn't really understand what it meant for my dad. I understood kind of what it meant for me in that, well, in a skewed way, it made me proud that my dad, at some level, he was whatever he did in Vietnam was apparently so extreme that it was considered insane. It was considered crazy. And, I didn't write this, and I remember now. He said to me, wow, that's fucked up. He said to me, we did not think that your father would be able, and this is before anybody was acknowledging PTSD. This is the guys in Vietnam apparently said, or this guy was telling me that they all did not think that my father would be able to come back to the United States and blend back into society with any success. He said that all of them were concerned, and apparently I didn't do a good job of writing this letter, because now I'm remembering. He also asked me if my father had ever beaten me, or if he had ever beaten Mom, or Travis, and I was like, no, he's never laid a hand on me. And this guy was earnestly fucking surprised. He was like, really? I was like, yeah, my dad I mean, yeah, he was distant until I was like 11 or 12, but once he jumped in, he jumped in pretty good. Um, Maybe a little cool, maybe a little distant, but not like abusive, not verbally abusive. Didn't have undue crazy expectations, And I told this guy, I was like, no, my dad was awesome. I mean, I consider myself incredibly lucky. And this guy was 100% shocked as shit. He was like, this dude is crazy. He also said he's a cold-blooded killer. I need to rewrite. I can't believe this silly letter. This is the first time I've read it. So I have a hard time reading this stuff, and I'm actually using this platform on YouTube to try to get myself to read it and share it with people without well, I'll probably will break down because this is easy to read. Except for now, I'm like, did I not want to tell them everything? What was my agenda with not saying all the things? I don't remember. Sorry, there's flies everywhere. Um, so yeah, when I sent this to my mother and my father read it, he called me up immediately, and he was like, "Who said this to you?" And I go, I don't know his name. I didn't ask him his name. I don't know who he was. And he's like, who would ever pull aside an 18-year-old girl and tell her that her father was crazy and a cold-blooded killer? And I said, you know what, Pubba? I think he was really concerned that maybe everything looked okay on the surface, but things were not okay. But don't worry, I let him know things were okay, but the truth of the matter was they weren't okay. They weren't okay for my father. They were okay for me. They were okay, but they weren't okay for my mother either. No, he was not physically abusive, but there's other things, intimacy things, or like trust and money things, and business and risk taking and living a life together that was not okay. Not okay for my mom or my dad. They were they're both living in kind of a trap. So anyway, that's it. 17 minutes. It's a short little piece of paper, and I thought it would take me like 3 minutes. But, so that's the first page from my father's memoirs. You know what? Maybe I didn't write all that in there because I didn't want my dad to know all the things that got said about him. But just enough to let the VA know that his buddies in Nam, before anyone ever knew what PTSD really was, were already like, this dude's not going to make it stateside. But he did. He did make it. So, that's it. Subscribe to my channel. I'm gonna be reading from this whole book. That's page 1. I'm gonna be reading. There's pictures. There's stories. A lot of it is my father's pretty good writer. He's kind of funny, but it's also straight up like killing people and what that was like and where his mind was and all that shit, and what it was like to live a life that you didn't tell anybody what was going on, not even your wife, not even your kids, and what it's like to feel like a liar. And he didn't subscribe for more.